We're going to get right into the program now, and our first panel of the day is Rebuilding Economies with Imagination. We'll provide perspective on the effect of the pandemic on creative economy across various global markets, such as Canada, Morocco, the UK, and the UAE. Please welcome your moderator, Laura Zucker, Director of the Center for Business and Management of the Arts at Claremont Graduate University.
This is the crystal balls session. We're going to look together into the future and hopefully discern what it's going to be. I'd like my panelists, Christopher Deacon and Anthony Sargent, please to join me, and I'll be introducing them a bit more as we begin the discussion. And Taoufik Aboudia, I think, is joining us virtually. Yes? Do we have Taoufik? Can someone tell me? Yes, we do. Great, I see him. Hey, Taoufik.
Hello.
Okay, well, this is part of what we're going to be talking about, our hybrid future. We're going to jump right in because we don't have a lot of time and we have so much to talk about. There's so much that has changed and is changing and is about to change, and we all, the people in this room, are the people who are going to help manage that change, right? So I want to lead right off with Christopher Deacon. He's the President and Chief Executive Officer of the National Arts Centre in Ottawa, Canada. It's a major performing arts center. You guys have been affected more than anybody else, probably, in the pandemic in terms of income and audience and facility issues and everything else you can imagine. But one of the biggest things that you've been dealing with is the switch to digital. Talk to us about it.
Well, good morning, Laura, and good morning, everyone. In fact, absolutely, the arrival of the pandemic completely eliminated social gathering, and really, when you think about the performing arts, it's fundamentally about sharing story in community. So we gather together to watch dance or music or theater, and I think to understand the impact of the elimination of the social element, we need to reflect for a minute on the fundamental aspect of the performing arts. So whether it's dance or theater or music or spoken word, really it's essential for the artist to share with the audience. In a sense, you're bringing together in a chemical reaction the artist and the audience in the same space. So if you see a movie in a movie theater, you are sharing a communal experience of a story, which is quite powerful. The difference in the performing arts is the artist is actually changing their performance, responding to you as an audience. So that chemical reaction is, in my view, fundamental to the experience. And so we lost that with the pandemic. We lost the ability to have that interaction. However, what we saw with the forced change to digital was the realization of the opportunity to have accessibility and reach through digital. So for example, at the National Arts Centre in Canada, this is a building in one city which has to serve a vast country. And we're producing and co-producing theater and music and dance, and also across the country with partners, but there's only so much impact we can have for all Canadians. However, with the digital platforms, we suddenly found my colleague Heather Gibson, who's with us here this morning, was programming singer-songwriters in a room that would normally hold 150 people, but we would have 15,000 people watching that show. And if you leave it up online for a few months, that number might go up to 40,000. So the reach question was a fantastic learning opportunity, and also the accessibility. People who can't afford, who can't travel, who have a physical disability, suddenly all of that evaporates. So I would say that for us, it was a very painful experience on a number of levels. Obvious reasons, as you say, loss of revenue. It was, our buildings were shut down, our artists were losing money. And all of us responded, I think, in different ways. And I hope the National Arts Centre was sustaining artists through that period. One of the things we were able to do is offer them digital work. So digital, I think, was a kind of short-term solution that really worked for us, and what will be interesting to see is how much of that sticks in the long term, because even if we have reach and accessibility, what we lose with the online experience is that social aspect, which for most performing artists is essential.
Okay, so Anthony Sargent, International Cultural Advisor, you've worked with so many performing arts organizations and programmed them yourself. Look into the crystal ball for us. How is digital going to continue in the future? Are we going to be able to monetize it?
Yeah, I think there's always a slight danger with this discussion of, because we had this explosion into digital in the last couple of years, it was somehow an aberration, and we may go back to how things were. And I don't disagree with the word that Chris said, but I would add something to it. I mean, yes, there is something very special about the live experience in the room. Of course, that's true. But I think it's a little bit like in the days of cinema, of film, in the early days. Then television came in and people thought it would wipe out film, but it didn't. You know, the two coexist to this day. And I mean, it is a crystal ball moment. I believe that we've passed through a very particular gate in the last 2 years. And I think people have become accustomed to being able to create a sort of sense of virtual connection through watching things online that they may not have expected to be able to do 2, 3, 4 years ago. And I don't think that's going to go. And I think there will be a greater degree of acceptance after the pandemic, whenever that is, that the experience you have online has a very significant element of connection in it. It's not the same kind of connection as in the live space, but it is a real and authentic connection. And in terms of monetization, I think it's another important thing that's happened in the last 2 years, is before the pandemic, as in so many things online, there was an expectation that it was all free. Everybody assumed in the early days of the internet, everything on the internet would be free. And I think it's interesting, there's been a lot of good research in the US about this, that in the last 2 years, because people haven't had, their business models have been undermined, obviously, by the lack of any income from physical engagements. So in a way, they've been compelled to start to put charges on online offerings. And people won't pay as much for it, but there is quite a lot of evidence now that people accept that it has a cost, and therefore it has a value, and therefore they're prepared to pay something for it. And one more sentence, and I think there is the possibility of a kind of double business model that has, you know, maybe a high ticket price for something you experience live, and say 2,000 people can see it. A much more modest ticket price that something like 200,000 people can experience. And I think you could build a business model on that.
But that's to be determined. Taoufik Aboudia, who's CEO of the Emerging Business Factory in Morocco, I want to bring you into this conversation. Where are the creatives that you're working with are in this whole digital creation and monetization? And I just want to add to this question that recent information from Culture Track, which is a really interesting survey of audience trends in the United States that just came out a couple of weeks ago with the latest, shows that a lot of artists, people are reaching artists directly for content and bypassing organizations like Christopher's. So where does that leave us?
Well, thank you, Laura. Well, to be honest, I've been trying to trigger my friends from the artist background or the art and culture background even before the pandemic. I've been discussing, I have been, as an incubator, trying to discuss with them what Anthony called the business models. The business models had to shift even before the pandemic. But of course, once we have been all locked down, we've been in this huge incubator of digital ideas and digital new business models where artists or creative people started to run new ventures or eventually trying to rebuild connection, like Christopher said, with their public, with their audience, bringing them maybe some ways in a free way, or in others trying to build virtual experiences in Airbnb experience, or even putting their value online and trying to get business-wise connected to the audience. To to be honest, just a month before the lockdown, I've been trying in an arrogant way. This is actually the way I talk to my friends here in Marrakesh. I try to shock them and try to tell them that the digital is part of their lives, part of their future. And they have to be convinced that even for the Qamarakshiya, I don't know if you know about it, this is one of the greatest things we have here in our heritage, human heritage. It's a kind of performance that used to be a folklore performance, but now there's so many ways delivering this art, culture, and social fact to the audience with a business model. Yet again, using videos, using websites, using mobile apps, using business models where we have subscriptions or business models where we have a one-shot selling product. So I'm not happy to have lived or to have seen my friends from the art and culture background living the pandemics, but I'm happy that we have embraced the change and the shift of the models, and now we have no shame talking about the digital environment. And you know, during the pandemic, one of the best growth of startups or companies around the world was Netflix. So it's a kind of a lesson or a kind of knowledge that people should think about and should embrace. And this is actually what I can say about how the creative should shift using digital, but also technology. And digital is a part of technology.
So research shows that 2/3 of people still don't want to pay for things online. And one of the fallouts from the pandemic has been a reduction in income for about 1/3 of the population of the world, some significantly more affected than others, so some literally can't afford to pay. In the performing arts, our business model has generally tended to be about half money coming from earned income, about half contributed. In the museum world, there's much, much less earned income. In the library world, there's so little income, right, that they're even doing away with fines on books in order to encourage people to come back and use libraries. Is your performing arts organization model going to fundamentally change in terms of how you're looking at supporting your activities?
Absolutely, and I just can't resist responding, Laura, to that. Barb, you threw it. I agree completely. Artists and audiences will drive this. It won't be institutions. And I think that is really where the strength is, where the voices of the stories are, where the music is, coming from the artists and the audiences. Institutions have to help, support, or get out of the way. So I completely agree with you there. In terms of your question, repeat it, sorry.
Well,
jet lag.
Looking at your fundamental business model that has relied so heavily on earned income, are we going to see performing arts organizations, as they embrace digital strategies, needing to let go of the reliance on earned income and raise more money?
Yes, but there's a number of reasons I think that is happening. One of the reasons that's going to happen is because institutions in the performing arts, particularly institutions, are being driven towards a goal of diversity and inclusion. So one of the barriers to participation is cost. One of them is this sense of identification that the culture track #1 identified, which is, that's not for me, I don't belong there. So these are the key goals for institutions, is to get engagement and to overcome those barriers. So I think absolutely the strategy is going to change, and the institutions have to be radically changed.
And then that's going to raise the question, where is the money going to come from, Anthony?
I will answer that. May I just, one sentence to go back to something Taoufik said, because there's a slight danger that we're thinking of online as if it's simply streaming performances. Of course it isn't. I mean, Taufik's right. There's a lot of creative stuff online that you couldn't do live. I mean, that only exists in the virtual space. And in a way, you can't have a debate with that work about should we do it live or should we do it online. It only exists as a virtual thing. I think I mean, I think it's hard to tell because we're not out the back end of this journey yet. But I think people are beginning to find the possibility of really very significant audiences. I mean, Chris said, some audiences that are many times larger than any live audiences you would have. And I think this is changing almost as we speak, but I think there is evidence. There's a lot of surveys by Wolf Brown in the United States that have really tracked the change in the last 2 years between people thinking that anything online is free and actually being prepared to pay. They've got a figure of $25, $30 for it. Now, those sort of, by American standards, modest ticket prices, if you have hundreds of thousands of people contributing that kind of money. So I think you're not in a way moving from earned to contributed. You're having a different kind of earned mix. So you're having a live earned mix with maybe higher ticket prices than you're physically in the space, and then maybe the same kind of total quantum made up of a very large number of people spending less money watching something online.
Okay, so now we're going to shift to another really important aspect of making the change happen, because people make it happen. And we're all going through, in every sector, in the United States it's called the Great Resignation, right? A change in the way people want to think about working. Taoufik, talk to us about that and your idea about creative nomads.
Yeah, this is something that really inspires us here in our region. I mean, Marrakech Safi region, but not only our region. I believe there's a lot of destinations around the world that have been more and more attracted to this new kind of living or new kind of traveling or new kind of working. It's both. It's a combo. People using digital have understood that they can work remotely, even before the pandemic. But once the pandemic have been lived by all of us, by small and big companies, we knew that we can have our employees, our colleagues, our collaborators working abroad or working just remotely. So we have been seeing a lot of creative travel agencies that came to the market with a new kind of offer, and they seduced people who were potentially digital nomad, what we call digital nomad. They seduced them to go on year trips, spending a month in every destination. Some of them came to Marrakech and spent a month before going to Lisbon, and then to Dubai, and then to different destinations. So for us as a destination, we would love to be attractive and competitive for this kind of people because of two things. The first is that they are they're full of ideas, they're full of inspirations. So like I said last time in our discussion, it was a kind of having bees around us with this pollination effect, where people in countries like in Morocco, we don't have access. I mean, the majority of youth and the majority of Moroccan people don't have access to foreign cultures. They don't have access to traveling. So having people coming from all around the world, and specifically the creative ones, would be just a shift for destinations like ours. In the same time, they are investors. They come to a destination like a passenger, but then they settle. I know about it because I've been partnering with two of them. I mean, I had two partners who came to Marrakech just for the fiesta, and they came and settled with companies. We run companies like in the medias. I've been blessed working with Patrick Chassani, who came from France just for a couple of weeks, and we started a whole venture about a Spotify-like business. It was the first Arab music platform. And the same thing for Pascal Chevalier, who came, and today we run an incubator and we run a lot of media websites. So I believe this is something that will totally shift destinations, and that destinations should be prepared to attract these kind of people. And for the creatives, it's just a blessing, because we love to travel. We found out a new way of work, a new way of living. Maybe at a certain time we could settle somewhere, but traveling around the world, it's something that clearly will leverage the creative ones behind us or from us, and will deliver more value to these creatives.
So
Because-
fantastic opportunity for Morocco, fantastic opportunity maybe for the UAE. How's it working out for you in Canada?
Well, in terms of the shift that we're seeing, I think there have been big benefits, and I think the choices, and I agree with Anthony that these are not black and white choices. There's going to be some complex mix. And I would say that the idea that Taoufik is talking about with respect to artistic and creative nomads is fascinating, because we've been working on on a model of touring and co-productions and collaborative creation. But the idea of artistic nomad is almost an extension of an artist residency, which is a model a lot of artistic companies know about. So I'm excited about that. I would say that in the short term, as Anthony has said, we really don't know how we're going to come out of this precisely. We're still in the midst of having performances being canceled because one of the performers has been tested positive, et cetera. So although we see a short-term return of live audiences, we had a week of sold-out performances of the Nutcracker last week in Ottawa. That's very encouraging. We have a season ahead of us like that. I think the big questions that we're talking about will take probably a few years for them to begin to clear the answers to take shape. But the idea of offering performances online for a price is certainly something we've had success with, but I would say there's certain kinds of performances that works for. And I think for most, to be frank, for most of the performances that the National Arts Centre is producing or co-producing, the benefits achieved through reach and accessibility through a free offer outweigh the kind of revenue we would see. So for some of the performances where we have charged money, we're seeing quite minimal revenue, and it really can depress the engagement figures. Whereas with respect to a lot of the offers that we've done, as I say, we're seeing 100-fold or 1,000-fold engagement.
But you've needed all new personnel to produce this kind of content.
Not quite. In terms of the artists, yes, they have to recalibrate. Some artists make this adjustment, and some artists don't want to or can't. In terms of the technical side, we made a modest investment in equipment very quickly when the pandemic struck. We've had to retrain people quite a bit, but I don't think that's the biggest challenge. The biggest questions for us really have to do with consumer behavior and expectation. If, as Taoufik says, if you have Netflix on your television, are you going to go instead to watch live performing arts locally? Maybe. But that's the question.
So Anthony, thoughts on workforce issues, creative, technical support, production? How's all this? How are people going to make this happen?
Yeah, no, I mean, look, this is changing. And if you go back, there were days in theatre when lighting and sound were very primitive, and people came out and performed on stage, and nobody really thought about sound design, and nobody thought about really complicated digital lighting. Now we take for granted really sophisticated sound designs, really sophisticated digitally controlled lighting. And I think what's been very striking in kind of anthropological terms in the last 2 years is how it has accelerated change on so many different fronts. And I think digital technology, and in terms of the technology available within venues, is one of those issues. I mean, firstly, prices have come tumbling down in the last 2 years, so a lot of things that 2-3 years ago would have been very expensive in digital terms are now much cheaper. Much more lighting and sound technicians. Lighting and sound used to be completely different. Then, with the growth in digital controls for lighting and sound, those technologies started to connect. And in a way, the same thing is happening now with online technologies. So certainly in the centres I've worked with recently, it's very striking how lighting and sound technicians have just naturally extended into working in the online space and controlling digital resources. And I think that isn't just big companies. It's there's been a very striking relationship has grown up between some big companies that don't have the in-house technical resources and some small, very specialist digital companies which have combined with the big companies. So I think coming out of this, in a year or whenever it is, we will find there's a much higher level of digital skills, a much more sophisticated level of digital equipment, a much greater comfort with online platforms than there was 2.5 years ago. I think because there wasn't any live in the last 2 years, there's been this extraordinary acceleration in the learning in all these other technologies.
So for those of you who missed Anthony's talk yesterday, it was so rich and full of the topic that we're talking about today and his forecast of what's happening and a brilliant report. Talk to us a little bit more in depth about how you see these business models and strategies changing.
Yeah, and I'm always accused, I'm particularly accused in Canada, of being an optimist. I'm not an optimist, I'm a rational positivist, and those two things are completely different. But I am a positivist, but a rational positivist. I think that the development of, up until 2-3 years ago, and this isn't just the pandemic, but the pandemic has accelerated it. When we thought of business models and we studied business models and we looked at business engineering, we were in a way moving parts around, a little bit more revenue here, a little bit less spend there, a tighter union agreement over here, a different pricing structure for performances over there. And again, this is a recurrent theme, but one of the learnings of the last 2 years, I think, has been, it's not, we don't need to look at our business models, we need to look at our business strategy. We need to step back from the day-to-day thing of what will my pricing model be for this performance, and can I do with 4 technicians rather than 6 and save some money over there? That's kind of, that's small change. We need to think of some, rather more fundamentally, of what are we here to do, what's the mission of the organization, and what approach to optimizing our resources, our people, our money, our creative talent, all those things. And I think people, because companies haven't been able to put on live performances, mostly, in the last 2, there are some extraordinary exceptions, like Theatre in Quarantine in New York, who've created whole new forms of performances in the last 2 years. But mostly, institutional-based companies haven't been able to perform conventionally in the last 2 years. And the wise ones, the smart ones in that group, have used that time to really rethink why are they there and what organization of their resources in the future might enable them to discharge their missions better. And I think coming out of this, there's going to be a bit of a fault line here. There will be, I won't say the dinosaurs, that's not quite fair, but the companies who haven't really engaged in any of that thinking, who sort of crawl out of the darkness of the last 2 years and try and pick up where they left off 2 years ago. Good luck to them. But there will also be the companies who've spent the 2 years really rethinking what are they trying to achieve and how can they organize their institutions to achieve that better. And out of that, I think, may come some really exciting, fresh thinking about how the arts works and how it engages with the community it serves.
So are we going to leap into the future, or are we going to be drifting back?
Well, I think it's, the truth is some people will do so and some will do the other, and it's an attitudinal thing, this. I think it's needed some courage in the last 2 years, actually, and some of this is about, courage, deep inside courage. I think there are people, and this isn't just to do with the pandemic, this is, to do with business generally. There are people who, when there's an adversity, whatever kind of adversity it is, who kind of cling on to the things that they know. Years and years and years ago, I did a course in speed reading, high-speed reading. And the way it was taught was they didn't get you to read faster and faster and faster and faster. They did a completely different approach. They made you stop reading by being able to hear the sound of the words. And then you start to read by absorbing areas of print as a group. And the point is, you have to abandon the old skill before you can learn the new skill. And I think that there will be people who are, look, we've all found the last 2 years traumatizing, but there are people who found it traumatizing and extraordinarily rich with potential. And there are people who found it traumatizing and just horrible. And I think I'm sorry for the second group, but I think the first group or you can see it everywhere, are seeing opportunities. I mean, another very quick example, the Fusebox Festival in Austin, Texas. The first festival they did during the pandemic in 2020. This is a live arts festival. You know, you buy tickets, you go to performances. If you don't live in Texas, you probably don't go to, you're less likely to go to it. And the pandemic hit them, and within 2 months, they had to do the festival. And it was an extraordinarily courageous thing. They basically reinvented the entire festival as an online thing. And they did live engagement with artists in their studios. Now, when they go back to being able to present some live work, they're not going to leave that stuff behind. So they're going to go to a world where, of course, there will be live performances, but there will also be, exactly as Taoufik's talking about, the kind of relationships that you can only do online. And I think, I mean, it's where I ended yesterday. It's a choice. It's a choice. We either have to be courageous and visionary and believe in a new kind of future, or we just have to think the last 2 years has been a horrific bad dream and clamber back 2 years. And I just don't think that's not the grown-up way to go.
So, Christopher, one of the things Culture tracked was 60% of us now feel more disconnected than we did before the pandemic. But 54% of us want to have fun, 39% of us want to be calmed, 37% want adventure, and 37% are craving connection with others. How are you changing what you're thinking about this performing arts model, which has not changed that much in decades, right? At this pivotal moment to address this.
Great question, and I want to just jump off something that Anthony was talking about. I think this is a moment where we have seen accelerated change, and there have been people who haven't been able to make that change, I agree, in institutions. But I think I see an intersection between the pandemic, the social justice issues. All of these things are confronting, particularly institutions. And so we're responding to sustainability, climate change, all at the same time. And I think that has accelerated change. And I think in terms of the craving connection, you see, for me, it fundamentally comes back to preserving and amplifying the fundamental value of the performing arts experience. I mean, that's my world, is the performing arts. The connection that you can get and the deep personal enrichment, the opportunity offered. So when you're watching, whether it's an opera or a ballet or any of these types of theater, the opportunity is there for learning, self-reflection, and in a sense, the story is a kind of it's like the vitamins inside the fruit you're eating. Story is deeply enriching, and I think that people are craving that, and yes, they can get it online, and in many ways that can be quite fulfilling. But I do feel that there will be some sort of blended future. And regardless of, I spend less time, and I think you're right, Anthony, I spend less time worrying about the financial model, and I spend more time worrying about the big questions. How does the culture and society respond to the challenges, and how do we get artists and audiences to lead us in communities rather than us trying to lead them? So that would be part of it.
So I want to make sure before we wrap up today, because we have representatives from 4 different countries, that we really look at how our different governments have helped us or not helped us address these issues, because I suspect they've been very, very, very different. In the United States, I can tell you, it's just been a mess. Between the federal government and the states handling things individually. The federal government did come through with huge stimulus packages. They did help many, many, many arts organizations were able to keep people employed through them. State governments did things as well that were important, but it was a confusing patchwork system, I would say, that depended on organizations' individual abilities to figure out and access complex assistance structures that were all reactive as opposed to forward-thinking. Taoufik, how was Morocco?
It's fine. It's totally fine.
You guys did a great job.
Yeah, I wanted to trigger Anthony with his optimistic attitude. To be honest, it's quite a mess here in Morocco. It's just a heritage, because the budget for the culture and art in Morocco is 1% of the global government budget, or at least it used to be. So you can imagine at which phase, or at which place of importance the cultural and artistic area or scene have been considered during the pandemic. But let me tell you a small story, please. When we've just started the pandemic, I've been called by our governor. In our region, we have a representative of the Ministry of Interior, which is the governor, and he asked us at EBF to deliver something like a collective intelligence scene and try to figure out what are the solutions in an economic way. And 2 months later, I wanted to build a kind of event, online event, which I called Second Life, because I'm like Anthony, I'm optimistic, but I'm not rational. And I built this thing, and I wanted the governor to deliver a small talk. And when I called him, I knew he was terribly busy with the interior stuff, the safety stuff. And I was shocked because he told me, sorry, when I called him, I told him, sorry, sir, I'm calling you for something maybe less important. I'm calling you to deliver a talk in a cultural event. And he told me, Taoufik, what are you talking about? If we have all these issues right now with people to understand the pandemic and to understand the measures and to deliver a model of citizenship, it's because of our lack of culture. So please deliver your event. So just to tell you how important, at the end of the day, how important is the culture of our country or our region. But since we don't have a real business model, since we don't have real business demographics about it, we have a lot of informal ways or figures of arts and culture in Morocco. So the government doesn't really care or doesn't really deliver.
Okay.
One of my optimistic ways to finish this purpose is the new Minister of Youth and Culture is a young guy, and I think he's going to deliver amazing things for both youth and culture.
Okay, well, that is optimistic. Who wants to go next, UK or Canada?
How incredibly uneven is governments' understanding of culture around the world. There are countries, Germany, Austria, Italy, where governments really understand a particular, globally, because I've been looking at this globally. I mean, what this has really told us is how incredibly uneven is governments' understanding of culture around the world. There are countries, what some countries did was import into the cultural sector kind of rescue packages from other industries. And because the cultural sector is such an extraordinary creature in economic and institutional terms, governments that were unfamiliar with that, often the mechanisms that they imported from other sectors just didn't work. And I think what that's taught a lot of us working in the arts is we really need to focus on those places where governments maybe don't, it's not just understanding how the sector works, it's understanding what the sector can contribute. And there's some very interesting areas where it shouldn't just be a single culture ministry. I mean, I think some of the governments that really have had success with this are where there are cultural tentacles that spread out into all kinds of other departments, planning, architecture, economic development, tourism. And I think there's a lot of learning for us as a cultural sector to help educate governments as to what the sector can contribute, but what it needs in terms of support from government to do that.
Canada?
Well, I would say, Laura, that it's a complex picture. There are many levels of jurisdiction, but generally I would say government response has been relatively robust. It's been relatively generous and I think far-sighted in Canada. However, we are seeing some challenges, is what I would say is sort of bottlenecks, where the funding is not always reaching, being disseminated or reaching all of the sort of end target population. So for example, institutions generally have been sustained generally, but the artists and technicians and artisans working normally employed by those institutions have fared less well, and that's a real problem we're seeing. It's not necessarily widespread, but it's very hard, I think, on a government policy level to solve that problem. I think it's incumbent upon the institutions at their worst moment to be their most generous, and that was something that we tried to do, and some other institutions did. But it's a well-informed, far-sighted approach to government funding.
Well, and I think your point is very well taken, because the government's approach was critically important during this, but the individual arts organizations' approach as well, their commitment to supporting artists, to spend down endowments, to realize the rainy day was here, and that's what the rainy day fund was for. It's really kind of separated our arts community and separated the kind of allegiances going forward that people are going to have with these institutions, right? As opposed to those who hunkered down. But we're here in the UAE. We have just a few minutes to wrap up. We are here because there's a wonderful department of culture and youth. How would we recommend to the UAE, from our diverse experiences, where investments should go going forward to help the cultural sector get to this next place post-pandemic? If you had a wish list, if you could provide one suggestion of where you would want to see government or institutions providing future support and how they would do it, what might it be?
Well, I would say I would target funding at the grassroots, at the small producers and creators, at the artists. It's not, I mean, I work for a big institution, but I think that that's where you can see some of the biggest, dividends.
I was going to say something very similar. I think the UAE has got an extraordinary record already at supporting major institutions. And there is a slight danger in having a cultural policy just based on large institutions. You can have grandeur, you can have scale, you can have economic impact, you can have tourism, but maybe you lack dynamism. And you lack that sort of slightly, I was going to say oppositional is the wrong word, but sparky grit that can come from individual artists. And I think that I would suggest that the next stage of the creative investment here by the government should, I would put it slightly differently to Christopher. I'm saying something similar but not exactly the same. I'm not sure I'd look for grassroots organizations. I would try to find individual artists who had really striking individual voices that people all around the world would recognize and be able to respond to. And I would try to find and support some of those.
Taoufik?
Well, maybe the main advice or the main thing I could bring to the table is bringing the authenticity of a country. For us, UAE is a model, but if I have to come up to the state where UAE is engaged in the cultural area, I would see more efforts done in the rural and the authentic country figures. What I say is, when I would love to invite people around the world to come in a table like this, a prestigious panel, I'm really blessed, but one of the things I would do is bring in someone from the mountain, like here in Marrakesh, or from the desert, to speak about culture and to put at the same stage what is authentic and real in a country and what is blessed to be delivered from other cultures and from the globe. This is the main thing I would maybe advise for countries like UAE.
So in Los Angeles and the United States, I've always thought of it as a cultural ecology, and that we need all parts of that cultural ecology represented, from small, authentic creators, grassroots organizations, to mid-sized organizations, which are very often the last thought of, right? People sometimes go to the top of the pyramid and the bottom of the pyramid, but leave out that group in the middle that I call cultural anchors, community anchors, very often. And we need all tiers and aspects, and I would urge all of us to look at what that cultural ecology looks like in our country and really figure out where strategic investment is going to help make the overall picture more rounded, more robust, and to shift investments fluidly. And to your point, Anthony, not be afraid of failure. If some investments don't work, if some artistic projects don't work, that's not only okay, it means if everything works, you're not risking enough. You're not pushing hard enough, you're not exploring enough, and the acceptance of some things not working out just the way you want is the key to unlocking a really innovative future, right? So I want to thank you so much for being here with us and being part of this conversation. It's really been a pleasure.